Christmas will be sad for us, as it will be for many people, I think, this year. But I think that it doesn't mean that we will sit around and bathe in our grief. I think that very often a time like this causes people to really reflect on the deeper meaning of, say, Christmas or any other occasion. I remember Easter of 1963, when my husband was jailed in Birmingham. I had just had my fourth child and was still confined to my house, and he had gone to jail on Good Friday, and I was very depressed. But somehow that was the most meaningful Easter that I have ever experienced, because, you know, Easter is a time of suffering, but it's creative, you know, if it can be creative suffering. And I think if we think in terms of my husband's life and his death in those terms, then we will not be as sad. We will be hopeful, because in his death there is hope for redemption.
I've long since learned that to be a follower of Jesus Christ means taking up the cross. And my Bible tells me that Good Friday comes before Easter. For the crown we wear, there is the cross that we must bear. Let us bear it for truth, bear it for justice, bear it for peace. Let us go out this morning with that determination.
In order to understand Martin Luther King, you must start with the fact that he was a minister. That is the key to who Martin Luther King Jr. was. If you try to take him as a, quote, civil rights leader or a political leader, you will miss the real King. He was first and foremost a minister.
From a little boy, you know, the child is father to the man. Everything I've heard about the little boy, Martin Luther King Jr., moved by the hymns that said you've got to be like Jesus.
I met Dr. King in the early days of the Montgomery bus boycott. I was amazed at his age and how young he looked. He didn't even look 26.
He always understood that this was not a course he charted. It in some way, almost mystical way, had been charted for him. He understood that forces had come together, coalesced, and put their hand on his shoulder, but it wasn't what he sought.
Those who are called and those who are sent, they have a choice. They can say yea or nay. But those who are chosen do not have that luxury. And I know there were many times when Dr. King would have chosen to say no. But it was like, you know, he was driven.
Reverend King, can you tell us why you're here?
Well, we've come here. I have several of my staff members here at the invitation of Dr. Shuttlesworth and the Alabama Christian Movement to assess the situation and determine whether demonstrations are necessary, that is, whether they should be resumed.
By the time of Birmingham in 1963, we're 8 years past the bus boycott. And ever since then, all the years after that have been, what did that mean? Where can you go from here? The decision to go into Birmingham was really the first time that Dr. King said, I'm not going to be responding to a crisis. I'm going to create a campaign to really try to test what we can do with nonviolence before it's too late.
Consequently, I have the feeling that if we can get a breakthrough in Birmingham and really break down the walls of segregation, it will demonstrate to the whole South, at least the hardcore South, that it can no longer resist integration. And I think everybody will find themselves going along with it if we can get a breakthrough in Birmingham.
What I can remember reading in the paper, a troublemaker. He was coming to make trouble, but good gracious, the way the situation was here,
The black man got a champion. They call him Martin Luther King. We call him Lucifer. And if this nigger think he can scare the niggers out, I'll also inform him that the white man can be stirred up to defend what is rightfully his.
Nobody wanted to go to Birmingham. Birmingham was a terrible place. There'd been 60 unsolved bombings. A black man just had been castrated. They caught him, saw him walking down the street at night by himself, and a white mob jumped out and castrated him. And nothing was done about any of this.
The violence that Birmingham represented, people knew could easily be turned and focused on King as a representative of the movement. So he was dealing with a decision that had to do with his own life.
He said, now y'all think they're gonna get me, but all y'all gonna be out there jumping in front of the camera and said, the bullet might be aimed for me, but one of y'all are gonna get it. He said, but don't worry. He said, I will preach the best funeral you ever had. And then he'd start preaching your funeral. Andy Young was a fine young man. See, but he thought that he had to have all of the ladies liking him. And he'd crack on you, but he pressed right on.
I will not rest until we are able to make this kind of witness in this city, so that the power structure downtown will have to say, we can't stop this movement, and the only way to deal with it is to give these people what we owe them and what their God-given rights and their constitutional rights demand.
There was an elaborate day-to-day almost plan for how Birmingham was going to take fire.
I created something called Project C at Dr. King's instruction. The C stood for confrontation. And we had primary, secondary, and tertiary targets. And what we wanted to do was to create such a situation that the powers that be would have to deal with us.
The demonstrations were going to build, and the black people of Birmingham were going to be inspired, and that it was going to spread, and that the fact that it spread was going to force the press to pay attention, which would force the government, that is the national government in Washington, to move and act. Well, that wasn't working. And the number of people involved in the demonstrations was dwindling rather than growing.
I remember we were under an injunction not to march in Birmingham.
And Dr. King had to decide whether he was going to follow the law or whether he was going to disobey the law.
The black business community came to visit us at the Gaston Motel, and they were saying to Dr. King that Birmingham was just too tough, and everybody made the case for calling the movement off.
A lot of the energy in the room, a lot of that was this energy of wrestling. What should he do? What should he do about the situation there?
There was a lot of doubt. There's a lot of I told you so.